Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation.
Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Shelley Oreo. Today we will begin a series of episodes on hate crimes. In this first episode, we will examine the 1999 arson attacks on 3 Sacramento area synagogues, the arson of a Sacramento abortion clinic, and a double murder in Shasta County committed by Benjamin Matthew Williams and his younger brother, James Tyler Williams. We will talk through how these crimes were all linked and how the cases unfolded. I am joined by DA Anne Marie Schubert, US Attorney McGregor Scott, Judge Stephen Lapham, Supervising Criminalist Faye Springer, and retired Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Agent Nina Delgadillo. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Can you all please introduce yourselves and briefly tell us what your role was in this case? And we'll start with Anne Marie.
So Anne Marie Schubert, Sacramento DA, and in truth, I had no role in any of this case, but I do think it was an important thing that we have a podcast on hate crimes in general, because it's obviously something that has a long history, not just in this region, but obviously in this country. And so this will be the first of several episodes that deal with hate crimes in our regions and how we're addressing those currently in today's day.
Judge Lapham.
So I'm currently a judge, but at the time of the arsons, I was an assistant United States attorney specializing in arson and hate crime cases, and that's how I came to the Williams Brothers case.
U.S. Attorney.
And this is McGregor Scott. I presently hold the job of United States Attorney, but in the summer of 1999, I was the elected district attorney in Shasta County, and where the double homicide occurred, and I handled the homicide case personally.
Nina.
Nina Delgadillo. I'm a retired ATF agent, and I was the case agent on the Choice Medical Group, the abortion clinic, and later became one of the case agents for the overall Williams Brothers case.
And Faye.
This is Faye Springer. I'm now retired, but working as a retired annuitant for Sacramento County. And I was called on the day of the arsons to come down and look at the B'nai Israel crime scene by Sac PD and ATF. And I stuck with this case all the way through to the resolution several years later.
So let's get into the arsons, and this is probably going to be more geared toward Judge Lapham, Faye, and Nina. Can you talk us through the series and what happened and in kind of what order?
So the synagogue arsons occurred first, and they occurred during about a 20-minute time span very early in the morning of June 18th. From the outset, we knew that this was probably the work of a single individual or a single group. We did the driving time between these 3 synagogues, and it worked out that a person could drive, set the fires in each location. They caused incredible damage to B'nai Israel, which was the first victim on the list. It destroyed their main sanctuary, the library, which held some very rare and valuable manuscripts. Okay. And then 2 weeks later, almost to the minute, there was an abortion clinic arson across town. And because of the nature of the arson, the way they were both committed, the time span, from the very beginning, we thought that there might be some connection here.
When those arsons first took place and then the initial investigation, what was known immediately?
Well, with the first 3 arsons of the synagogues, we knew that they were connected. We didn't find out that the Choice Medical Group was connected until later.
And that's the abortion clinic.
Exactly.
And Faye, what kind of evidence then was
Well,
there for
I
you?
responded to the B'nai Israel case the next day. The arsons occurred at night, and so I was called the next day. And the reason I was called was to look at some splash patterns that were on the wall And there was an idea that there was more than one person involved, and they wanted to see if there was any information in the splash patterns that would indicate 2 people or more. Well, I couldn't make that determination, but I did see other evidence that was of interest to preserve and make sure that things were collected properly. So I asked for there was an oil bottle, a mobile oil bottle laying on the floor of the synagogue, and I could see there was trace evidence on the mouth of the bottle. And also there was broken glass where the windows had been broken, a door window was broken. So I worked with ATF because they were going to do part of the evidence and I was going to do the other part. And I worked with them in the collection and the proper procedures and order which that evidence should be processed. So basically I got to pick up all of it, bring it back to my lab, make sure all this trace evidence was secured, then send it to ATF lab for the arson and fingerprinting. And I think they tried DNA, but there was actually no DNA on those cases.
So on the subject of the evidence and whether or not there were multiple participants, we had a witness tell us that they saw an oxidized red vehicle parked across from B'nai Israel during the time when the arson would likely have been set. There was one person in the vehicle, and we suspected from the beginning there could be as many as 3 people on the case overall. We also found evidence at the crime scene, one of the synagogues, that started to lead us to Reading as the location for these potential suspects. We had a newspaper, for instance, that was lining a box that was from the Reading Searchlight.
And that's because all the evidence was not consumed. There was a poor mixture, if you will.
Wasn't consumed by the fire.
Wasn't consumed by the fire, right, which led us to being able to find the newspaper, the Reading Searchlight.
And Faye, you had mentioned that it didn't burn very well because of the substance that they used.
Yes, I don't remember what the accelerant was, but it was not gasoline. It was like diesel fuel or
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
an oil
It was
or something
too
like that.
rich, I believe it was.
Yes, it's too heavy,
Mhm.
basically.
Yes.
But then there was another piece of evidence, I think, that ATF had recovered, the flyers
Yes.
that kind of indicated the hate crime.
Right. There was pro-Serbia, anti-NATO, anti-Semitic, and you have to remember that this is all around Y2K. Everybody, there was a lot of things going on. People their anxieties were heightened, and so they were listening to some of this rhetoric about, the white race being taken over, and there was a lot of hatred going on. And so when we started looking at this, you can imagine your house of worship being, being attacked. And feeling like that's your sanctuary and that's your safe place. And it's no longer your safe place when this is happening, and it was continuing to happen.
So we're going to move on to the Shasta County case. So we had the 3 synagogue arsons and the abortion clinic a little while after that. So McGregor Scott, I'm going to bring you in. Can you talk about what happened then in Shasta
Sure.
County and when that happened?
Sure. So there was a fairly prominent homosexual couple in Shasta County, Winfield Mauder and Gary Matson, and they lived together at a very rustic residence in a very rural part of what we call Happy Valley in Shasta County, the unincorporated part of the county. And their bodies were found by Mr. Matson's brother on the morning of July 1. They had been shot several times while sleeping in their bed in the home, and at that point, that's about all we knew. And the sheriff's department began an investigation. We had really very few leads. There were 2 pieces of evidence that were immediately identified. One was shell casings from the murder weapon that had been used. And then also, and what had brought Mr. Matson's brother out to the home that day was that he had called out there and the message on the answering machine didn't sound right. Something was off with the message that was on the answering machine. So he went out to check on his brother and Mr. Mauder, and he discovered the 2 bodies. So at that point, the sheriff's department, as I said, launched an investigation, but we didn't really have a lot to go on at that point. The break in the case, I think, that led all of us to where we wound up was that through some good old-fashioned detective work, one of the detectives assigned to the investigation had a contact with one of the major credit card companies. He sort of put out a bolo, basically, to the credit card companies. And sure enough, they got a call that Mr. Matson's credit card had been used to purchase a bunch of firearms-related materials, and they were being shipped to a mail drop box facility in Yuba City. So they called down to Yuba City PD, and just by happenstance, there they were picking up the stuff. And you talk about, sometimes you get lucky. And so the two Williams brothers were taken into custody after sort of a tense standoff. There was some thought that maybe they're going to shoot it out. And they were they had their own car, which was just full of stuff in the back. And I think many of the things that we've already discussed this morning in terms of evidence for the arsons were found in that car. And then lots of stuff related to the murders was found in that car, one piece of which I'll call out here in just a minute. So the Shasta County Sheriff's Department took them into custody, booked them into the jail on murder charges, which was all fine and dandy. But as the DA, all we really had was possession of a stolen credit card at that moment in time. So we charged them with possession of stolen property, held them, and the sheriff went out and began to build a case. And then in the subsequent days, the Sheriff's Department, in conjunction with the Reading Police Department, executed search warrants at the, I'll call it a shack, where Ben Williams was living, and lots of evidence was found there. What ultimately was proven to be the murder weapon was there. Tyler, the other Williams brother, his palm print was on the murder weapon. The list that I think you'll talk about here in just a minute of prominent people in the Jewish community and others in Sacramento was found. Literally mountains and mountains and mountains of what I'll call hate literature. And these two, we quickly determined, subscribed to just a bizarre, far-right, crazy brand of Christianity that, if you weren't white and you didn't have blue eyes, you didn't count. And that they had taken on, and this was borne out by public statements made by Ben Williams to include on national television, that he essentially was God's hand on earth to avenge white people. And so we did ultimately charge them with 2 counts of murder, use of a firearm, the California State Hate Crime Enhancement, and in our case went from there. I mentioned that the 2 pieces of forensic work that were, I think, vital for us in the moment when I knew we've got our guys. One was the matching of the shell casings found to the weapon that was found in Ben Williams. But I think even more significantly, within the back of the car that they were in that day in Yuba City, a homemade silencer was found. And there was a speck of blood on that silencer. And the state DNA lab determined that was Winfield Mouter's blood. So that was obviously a very, very significant piece of evidence. And I remember this very distinctly. That week, after they were arrested, Bill Lockyer, who was then the state attorney general, called me at home one night and said, "What can we do to help?" And I said, "Test the DNA on that blood." And they did, and they got it done very quickly, and we had our results, and so we took it from there.
When did that murder happen in terms of timeline of the arsons? And then how did these cases then start? How do they then overlap or connect?
So the murders occurred on the night of, we think July 1st. And the
June 30 into July 1, sometime during that evening.
Okay.
right. And then the abortion clinic arson occurred July 2nd. And then the 2 cases started converging when, during one of the search warrants, the state investigators found a document that seemed to refer to the B'nai Israel arson. It was a list of prominent members of that congregation, and particularly there was a parenthetical that $10,000 reward on us, flattering, or something, words to that effect.
Wow.
Well, and it turns out that Alex Padilla, a local bail bondsman, had offered a $10,000 reward for the capture of anyone involved in the synagogue arsons. So now the 2 investigations are starting to converge.
And we really worked well with Shasta County District Attorney's Office and the investigators. And in fact, I'm friends with the lead homicide investigator today. It was a case where truly it was a united effort by everyone, because we poured over the evidence that they would send us and some of the things that they found in their search warrant to see what the connection was. And we started seeing some commonalities there and some things like that, some literature, some hatred. And then even later when he was on public television, Matthew said, I want a beautiful, clean, pure white society, the American dream. And you could see that thought process all throughout his writings. He kept a very explicit diary.
I know it takes some time for the forensic analysis to be done, but Faye, what did that reveal? What did that contribute to the investigation?
For my part, it was mainly looking at the evidence and then communicating with the investigators what kinds of things were there. I know I talked to Nina about where's the green paint coming from. There's got to be something with green paint because, eventually us other warrants were done for the arsons on the suspect's parents' house and the car, and the suspect's car, not the victim's car from Reading. And in there were 2 pry bars. And on the pry bar was this big chip of green paint. And I knew none of the synagogues had green paint because I'd been to all of them. And my last resort was to call Nina, and she said, yeah, it's got trim all around it. And that's the broken door.
Yes.
Had glass that was also on the pry bar and this green paint. Glass is, it's a material that's not necessarily unique, but has a lot of variation. So everything that we were able to test showed that, it was similar to the glass from the abortion clinic, and the other one was similar to the glass from the door of B'nai Israel.
Right.
And among the treasure trove of items in the back of the car that Greg was referring to was that crowbar that we've talked about before.
Got it.
So there's a direct connection there.
And Faye, you mentioned to me this morning when you were talking about that there was some evidence of feathers as well.
Yeah, so that's a whole nother category of physical evidence. So when we originally picked up the oil bottles from the floor of B'nai Israel, I took everything off of there and took a look at it before I sent it over to ATF, and basically communicated with ATF that there were feathers, there were dog hairs, there were fibers, and I think there were some of the blue fibers that might have come from a blue polyester
Right.
material.
There was fingerprint evidence,
Yeah.
document evidence, trace evidence, firearms
I
evidence.
don't think there was any
DNA.
fingerprints, though.
I think that
Not on the
not on
dog
that,
bottle.
but palm, but the palm print.
We had
On the cervical flyer.
Yes. So if you look at the total
Total
case of
picture,
all the
yeah.
types of evidence, it was a criminalist's dream.
Yeah. Oh, and there was paint. Probably the most significant was the paint, because it was a multi-layer paint chip that was on the mouth of the bottle. It's either on the mouth of the bottle or there's a little rag
Right.
that was tied around the handle.
Right.
And that came back to the shed that was in the back of the parents' house.
Right.
Palosidro?
Palisidro.
Yeah.
Right.
And that trace evidence was then ultimately linked and traced back to the parents' house, including the fibers, dog hairs, feathers, and paint chip.
We were really fortunate to have Faye, because I know just even at the Choice Medical Group, when she came out and she processed the scene with us with some of the items, and we talked a lot about things that we were finding out through our investigation with our canvas interviews. And we found out that a garbage man had seen 2 individuals with dark-colored, looked like jumpsuits on.
Yeah.
We later
Found a
recovered.
jumpsuit, yeah.
We later found the jumpsuit with what Faye connected with some of the glass that connected us to different places. And this was, in my 25 years in ATF, I'd never had a case like this that had so much of every kind of evidence, every kind of trace evidence you could imagine. And it was I couldn't actually wait to go to trial, because I thought this is going to be great.
So the murder case was charged first. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's right. And we physically had them in the Shasta County Jail for really, other than some court appearances, the rest of the time that the 2 cases were pending. And on the theory that we had, this was a death penalty case, since it was a double homicide. And I think in consultation with Steve and I spent a lot of time on the phone and in meetings together trying to figure out how to make this all work. And that was our agreement, was that we would hold them on the theory that they should have access to their lawyers on the most serious case, and then come to Sacramento as needed to consult their lawyers and make court appearances. It was a very collaborative approach from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and frankly, a small DA's office in a rural part of the state. So we were very grateful for all the help and assistance.
When was the arson case then charged? And that was here in Sacramento.
Right. And by its nature, federal cases take a little longer to charge. We've got the grand jury that we can use to interview witnesses, to gather evidence. So I wouldn't be able to say exactly when it was charged.
Why was this a federal case?
Arson is a federal
Oh,
offense.
it is, okay.
Also, hate crime is a federal offense.
And then, so the charges were all related to the arsons. And then did that case move forward first before the
They're
murder
moving
case?
forward simultaneously.
Okay.
Parallel tracks.
Got it, okay.
What was really good about tying the brothers together, because at some point, Matthew was really trying to take all the credit for everything and really trying to move the case away from Tyler,
Yes.
his younger brother. And he had a great influence over his younger brother. But having Tyler's ability to manufacture that silencer in the place that he worked at was really important.
Well,
to
yeah,
the
that's
case,
a
too.
great point, and I'll elaborate on that for just a moment.
Sure.
I had one of my lawyers in the office helping me with the case, and we decided and came to refer to them as Matthew was the philosopher and Tyler was the mechanic. And because Tyler had worked in a machinist shop and we think made the homemade silencer, those kinds of things. So they each had their role, I guess, for lack of a better word.
So
And
Tyler
this-
he was following direction from his older
That
brother.
was how we were going to present the case to a jury. Yes, that the older brother was the dominant personality and Tyler was following and assisting his brother.
Join us for our next episode where we'll continue discussing the Williams brothers' hate crime spree in 1999.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.